Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, citizens of the universe. Thank you for listening to the Entre tu arte y mi arte podcast. Today we will be talking about theater and gender. And to guide us through this conversation, today is joining me a very special and talented guest. It's a privilege to have you here, Rita DiSibio. How are you?
I'm good. I'm really happy to be here. It's great to reconnect with you, and I'm doing well.
Quite literally, we haven't talked in years, ages. So, why don't you tell me a little bit about like what you've been doing in school, what you studied, the projects that you have, uh, and whatever work you're doing right now.
Yeah. So I have been going to school at CU Boulder here in Colorado. I'm a senior there now, so I'll be graduating in the spring semester. I'm studying acting, theater, and I've just been performing a lot. Not as much during COVID, but I have been in a couple projects recently, and I'm looking forward to graduation and thinking about like sort of those projects that are going to happen in the future. I'm hoping to like work a lot with new work and playwriting and sort of developing new projects instead of performing. I found that I have like a passion for that I discovered while at school. So yeah.
So you like writing your own original stuff?
Yeah, I do. I kind of just started that in the past year, so I don't have as much experience as I would like, but I discovered that I really enjoy it, so I've been trying to do that a little bit. I've had a couple staged readings of my plays, and then I was in a project in October where we devised a show about identity, and I wrote a piece for that and got to perform it, which was really cool.
That's awesome, Rita. And do you have any projects that you would like to tell our listeners about, that you might be working on that you might be performing on right now? Or if you don't, that's totally okay.
I don't know because I'm working on some stuff, but I don't know when it's coming out. But if people want, I posted on my Instagram a like a little clip from the show that I devised in October where I performed the piece I wrote. And so my Instagram is just my name, Rita DiSibio. And it's like on the like Instagram TV. It's like one of those things, and it's pretty early on. So if people want to watch that, that would be cool.
Absolutely. I'll link them here in the description so that they can go check it out. So, what kind of topics you deal with in your plays, or what are they about, or what would you like to talk about in your work?
Yeah, I really, right now in this moment of my life, I'm sure it will change, but I'm really interested in identity and how we think of ourselves, how other people think of us, and the reactions that causes in other people. So something in particular is I've been writing a lot about my experience with my gender identity, and that is a topic where a lot of people are either really supportive or really hateful towards it. And so I would love to one day write a piece that an audience can go see and just gets a completely new perspective of that experience, and maybe it makes them think about how they treat these people who might have a different experience than them.
Oh, that is amazing. That is very beautiful. So, if I didn't know that you had like a journey with gender identity, so even before we continue with this, I would like to ask you, what are your pronouns, just so that we're clear on that and I don't mess up.
Yeah, of course. Thanks so much for asking. Right now, my pronouns are they, them. Those are the ones I prefer. Yeah.
Okay, that's great. I'll try to. It's something that I haven't actually had as much experience with, so forgive me if I mess up during this conversation. It's not on purpose or whatever. Um, but yeah, no, that is super interesting. So theater and identity, I suppose it's something that is kind of, or acting, I suppose it's something that is interesting, and there are a lot of things there because I was thinking like, so is gender a performance that we do? Like, is it something that we perform in line with certain conventions? Like, in the previous episode that we just recorded for this podcast, we were talking about what is masculinity and how it has changed through time, right? So, is for example, these gender roles are they things that we perform just as we would perform roles in theater or characters in a play, something like that? What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think that exactly. I think gender is a performance. Especially gender expression, like how we do our hair, what clothes we wear, if we do makeup, if we don't do makeup, and then when we do those things, like the certain events that we dress more nice for or dress in a certain way for. Um, Especially, I think women have a very specific experience with that where there are so many gender roles in place that place women as this sort of object of the male gaze. And so it's this performance that they are putting on, whether they realize it or not. And it's not necessarily a bad thing, because some people do genuinely like just dressing up and they do it for themselves rather than for other people. But I think there's an aspect of gender that a lot of people are performing that they don't realize that they are performing, and that they're doing it for someone else's eye. And I think COVID actually, and like being in a pandemic, made a lot of people question that, because so many people were at home for so long that it kind of like, who am I getting dressed up for? Why am I getting dressed up for? Why am I getting dressed up in this way? Like, do I do it for myself? Am I doing it for someone else? Yeah.
As you were saying, like seeing that this way of behaving or this way of dressing up is just like a performance, as you were saying. Is do you think, as you were saying, like your plays that you would like to write about and whatnot would be would have the goal of helping people understand or helping people through their identity with I mean through their journey with gender. So how do you think theater, or is theater, does it have like a quality that could help us see that we're performing all the time?
I think, let me think a second. My answer to that question, I think, comes from like my own experience with with my relationship between gender and theater, which was that because as I was growing up in theater and then when I went into college, I was playing roles of different genders and different I don't, maybe stereotypes. I don't know if that is that the I don't know if that's the right word, but and it helps me realize like how we sort of exaggerate, oh, I don't know how to say this, like how we think of women versus men. Like you see the different characters that it's like this character is quote unquote like passive or weak, so she must be feminine, like that's a feminine quality, and it's like that's so
Right.
messed up. Like why do we
Yes.
think that? Yeah, and it's all just been like enforced through like time and rules and laws and social cultures. And I think theater is a really good place for people to break out of that. So when I started playing male roles, it's not that I identify as male, but I was experiencing what people call gender euphoria, where I was like, I feel really good presenting in this way that is not a woman. And I had to first sort of examine. I was like, I need to make sure this isn't just like internalized misogyny, internalized male gaze. And it took a lot of thinking about that and talking to other friends who experienced the same thing about that, for me to realize that it wasn't about that. I think it plays a role in women's experience with gender and people who are assigned female at birth birth's experience with gender. But there was like something more innate where it was like, I don't feel any connection to leaving the stage and still identifying as a woman. It was a character for me, and I was like, I don't want to be a character when I'm not on stage. So that's sort of what like catapulted my journey into thinking more about
Oh,
that.
yeah, that is very interesting. So I guess like something that I've always thought about since I started studying filmmaking, and like I had to deal with actors, and I've acted as well myself in some short films and whatnot. It's like what are the similarities and differences, and I think this is quite relevant to the conversation that we're having between acting and being, and like how do we how can we mark that line, I suppose, between how when we're performing and when we're just being ourselves, I suppose, or how can we identify that?
Oh, that's a great question, and it's one I think about a lot. There's a theorist, maybe I don't know if that's the word, but there's a theater person who wrote a book called "The Empty Space," I believe, and his name is Peter Brook, and he writes in it that anything that is a person being witnessed by another person is theater. And I thought that
Mm,
definition was super interesting because it's like, when are we not performing? When are we not acting? Yeah,
right.
I think everyone does act. Like, you have, your personality when you go into work. You have your personality when you're hanging out with friends. And you have your personality when you're by yourself. You have all these different, like, versions of you. Um, and so there's, like, that's interesting to think about. But I do think that we are ourselves when we're in a not like performative sense of like intentionally doing a show. I think we are ourselves when we're not on stage, and the difference is that acting is an exaggeration, even if it doesn't seem like
Hmm.
it. It's because like film, you're like, someone might say like, oh, in film they don't exaggerate, but in a way they do, because you're trying to show, even if it's in the most subtle way, you're trying to show your emotional journey through the world's events. Whereas in reality, I think we're constantly trying to hide ourselves, or hide those reactions, especially if we think they're negative, and we're trying to show the most like controlled versions of ourselves. Like, I think about social media, where we only post about the good things. We only want to
Right.
show these like really sort of larger than life versions of ourselves, which is also a kind of performance as well. So there is a fine line between like, when are we not acting in that sort of like philosophical sense, but I do think we are being ourselves, hopefully, when we're not on stage in the intentional, like, I'm putting on a performance sense.
Right, right. But like we definitely perform, let's say, different roles when we're with different people, right? Like, for example, I don't act the same way when I'm with my friends from the US as when I'm with my friends from Mexico, or I don't behave in the same way as when I'm with my parents. Um, and it's weird because, yeah, there are some characteristics of yourself that you do maintain, um, but it's like you were playing a different part or a different role of yourself, depending on with whom you are. Um, and I don't know what that says about our identity. I suppose it's kind of fluid in that sense as well. Can we really pinpoint or define who we are if we're constantly, suppose, acting differently with different people? Yeah, so I guess another thing that is interesting is, and that I've come across as well in film, is representation. and the way we represent different people of or different genders on the screen or on the stage. Um, and I suppose for you being a non-binary artist, how does that feel like in on the stage or in theater when you're writing? What's the experience there?
Yeah, there I've experienced, and I've only been out for like I think 2 years now, so it's a bit of a new experience. But I've experienced good and bad things where, the good things are that as a writer, I can write these stories that I haven't seen a lot of up to now, so I can like write my own stories and see myself in these stories, as well as when there are plays that have non-binary characters in them. It feels really good to be able to audition for that and be like, this is how I identify right now and this is how I see myself, and I can play this character that identifies in the same way. But it's also really interesting to navigate for in places that are sort of not doing as new of work, so they're doing plays that are still in the binary, which is fine, but then it becomes this thing of I'll go to audition and this kind of panic of like, okay, well, do we call them back for a role that's a woman, or do we call them back for a role as a man? And it's been interesting to see that sort of panic happen in like directors and in audition and callback rooms. And it's so interesting because for me, I genuinely don't care, because it's acting, and like, and in real life.
Or is that a lot of films or TV shows or whatever, there's a lot of outrage from the audience when, I don't know, for example, a straight male is playing I don't know, a non-binary character or a gay character or something like that. And I think you were saying that, yeah, at the end of the day, is acting, and it's a performance, so it doesn't really matter whether the actor is a male or a female or whatever. I've seen some amazing women play male characters, and it's a great performance. And the character, I think you said, that if a character is just focused on like their gender or whatever, and there's nothing more to them, then it's really not a very interesting character, because there's so much more layers of what defines a person, I suppose.
Yeah. I do think, while it is like it's all is just a performance, I think and this is like, I also see a lot of this conversation happen too in theater. I think the line with who plays what is could be drawn at if the story is about that character's journey and or struggle with like sexuality or gender, because then it becomes about representation, and like seeing yourselves in those stories. Because if I were to go to like the movies, if I go see a play and the play is about a non-binary person coming out and struggling with like family or something, and I'm seeing like a straight white male like play that role, I'm gonna feel a disconnect, because it's like,
yes, it's not realistic.
Yeah, exactly. But if it was like a story where it was just like, oh, this character is non-binary, but that is not a part of the story, I would like to see myself represented, but it is a performance, so if all they can get is a really good like woman or man, then it is just a performance. So
yeah, exactly. It's a tricky conversation, because it's like in the dark past of filmmaking, for example, you had blackface, right? So you had white men, like painting their faces black to act as if they were black people, right? And there's the line there as well, like, until what point is it performing, and until what point is representation, right? You obviously want to have black people playing black people, or Mexicans playing Mexicans, or whatever, right? Um, because you want that real representation, you want that connection with reality. So I totally understand that, uh, in terms of identity. But I also think that to some extent, um, it's acting as well. And as we were saying earlier, uh, gender is a performance. So unless, as you just said, it's paramount to the story that the representation is accurate with reality, then I don't think it's 100% necessary to have, um, a non-binary person play a non-binary role, or a Mexican play a Mexican, or whatever. There's some instances where you can see the difference definitely, and that makes a disconnect. But I don't know. It's a complex conversation, and it's the first time that I'm actually having it with somebody, because people usually close themselves when you start talking about this kind of stuff, and it's complicated.
Right, because a lot of people, I think, from an actor's perspective, when I've had this conversation with people, the people that kind of shut down are the ones that are afraid of like losing roles, which is like kind of messed up if you think about it. Like the fact
Right.
that we're asking, it's like, hey, can we please see ourselves on screen?
Can we have a role? Yeah.
Like, yeah, they're just like, no, like I'm gonna lose this role if we allow that, and it's like, no, like,
Yeah. Not at all. Yeah, it's so strange. But it's good to have this conversation. I think there should be more spaces where this conversation should be uh, should be discussed, because it's something very important. I think identity and the way we shape. I think theater and film and the scenic arts are so important in the way we define, um, the conventions of our society. As you were saying, like, just now, the representation of the male gaze is changing in like film, probably in theater a little more, I guess, um, because film is very, I don't know, I think it's very closed and very strict in its conventions. I would like to think that theater is a little more experimental, uh, but I'm not sure. I haven't had that much experience either with it. Um, but yeah, like, it's really strange because I really like watching all kinds of movies and plays and whatnot. And sometimes I'm watching a movie and I'm like, oh, this was definitely written by a white guy, a white straight guy, because it's awful. And sometimes it is written by a straight white male, but it's a little better. So, and sometimes you can tell when it's written by a woman, because the perspective is completely different. But I think a lot of people are not aware of these things. Us, I guess, because we studied this stuff, but a lot of people just accept this as a convention and just go with it, and that perpetuates stereotypes and conventions. And it's not healthy for society and for people.
I completely agree. Have you by chance seen had a chance to see the Queen Gambit? The Oh my gosh, the Queen's Gambit on Netflix?
No, not yet. I've heard mixed reviews about it, so I don't know, if I should. But is it good? I'll take the recommendation right now if it is.
Yeah, I mean, I was gonna say it kind of relates to this conversation where the
Okay.
main character is female, and she like reaches a point where she's like having like this mental breakdown, except it's so romanticized, and in that moment you can like tell that the series was written by a guy, because she's like all, like half clothed with like beautiful makeup on and like smoking, and
Oh
it's
my
like,
god.
if this is what you think women look like when they're having a breakdown. You've not been around a
You're
woman.
so
like...
wrong.
So I just thought that was interesting.
Yeah, I was just saying that how do we change the way in which people are represented on the screen or on the stage? And I suppose like one answer is, well, having these sort of conversations, and another one is having people like you writing those types of journeys of or stories or characters, because I think we need a lot more of that stuff, to shift perspectives and change just the way the world sort of works. And I think that's the power of art. And that's why I like theater and film so much, because I think that they have a lot of power to define the way we see the world.
I completely agree. I think having more writers who have these experiences that aren't being shown in mainstream media is really important, as well as just even something as simple as casting. Like if a writer writes a story that it's about like love, for example, it's just a typical love story, why do the two people have to be white? Why do the two people have to be well, I was gonna say why do the two people have to be straight, but I do think that when straight people write like gay love stories, sometimes it doesn't actually represent what they're like. But just stuff like that, like why casting can be so helpful in seeing representation, and I don't think people talk about that enough.
Yeah, no, totally. Something something that I've had like a problem with, like an internal conflict with, is the James Bond movies, which, as a straight white male myself, I kind of like them, but at the same time I'm like, these are so bad. Like these are so misogynistic, so male centered, um, and so I just have this thing inside me where I'm like, this is so strange, um, because to some extent, like I'm used to seeing this as the norm or as the convention, but on the other side, I'm like, this is not the way it's supposed to be. Like the world is not how it's being represented here, um, and the upcoming Bond movie casted a black woman as the replacement of the current or the previous James Bond or something like that. And I thought that was really interesting. And I don't know how would that work, um, but I'd really like to see it, because it'd be like a completely different take on the character. Um, but like I had a friend who was outraged by it as well, because it was like they're completely changing the character. But I was like, well, maybe it's for a good reason.
Right.
You know?
Maybe it's a good thing. I'm curious
Yeah.
if it will be done well, or if the misogyny will transfer
perpetuate.
over. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it was written as well by a straight white male, so I don't know. But it's interesting, nonetheless, I think.
Yeah.
But yeah, and just I was just thinking like how theater has such a great power as well to um just to shape the way in which we see certain things. For example, because my name is Romeo, like I almost every time I meet someone else, there's some reference to Shakespeare, Romeo and Juliet, and whatnot. Which is, I mean, I'm used to it at this point of my life, but it's like it's so interesting to see like how that story is the like one of the most known stories about what love is and what romantic love is. And like every time I encounter that conversation, I'm like, well, you do know that they were only together for like one night and then they killed themselves, right? That is that is the story. That is the most romantic thing ever. And it's so strange how that is. Like, I suppose a lot of people don't or haven't actually read the play, but how just that is ingrained in our minds as the the most pure expression of love or whatever. So I definitely think that there's this power in theater and in film to change the way in which we see the world, and I think it's it's urgent for us to start taking that path into changing the way we see things.
Yeah, I think someone once told me in one of my classes, you can make theater about how the world is currently, but you can also make theater about how you wish the world could be, and that can be a lot more powerful, because it
Right.
does have this power to change how we are and how we live in society.
Yeah. No. 100%. I agree. Um. Oh man, I was gonna say something and I just forgot. Uh. Ah man, it was something important as well. Um. It'll come back to me. But yeah, how do you feel like right now? Changing a little bit the subject because I just forgot what I was gonna say. Um, how do you feel about like right now during COVID? I know like for film it's been really hard, but I cannot even imagine how hard it's been for theater. Like with everything shutting down, you cannot rehearse. What has been your experience with that, or what do you know about it? Because I really don't know what the state of the matter is with theater.
Yeah, there's a lot, because part of what makes theater is having that audience. So it's been
Exactly.
so
Yes.
weird, but the theater artists I've been around have not stopped trying. So in school, what they did was at the beginning of the school year when before the second wave had hit, so everything was kind of in this like lull.
Yeah.
I think one of the shows they did, the actors would rehearse and meet in person. Or they didn't always rehearse in person, but they recorded the play in person. They all kept their masks on, and then they had that recording streamed, so there was no audience, but they were on
Oh
stage.
man.
Then there was a second
Right.
production that was completely virtual, and that was really interesting to watch. Um, and then I was in a production that they were trying to turn a play into a film, but then the film crew kind of got uncomfortable, and so we had to stop the production, because we were trying to like take off our masks for like little increments to act, and then we would put them back on. And I think the film crew was like didn't want to risk it, which
Mm.
is so valid and fair. It COVID is not
Yeah.
something to not take lightly, but uh oh my gosh, words. Yeah, I think it has been really hard in that aspect, and companies have been trying to find ways to provide content to their subscribers so that they can still make some money, because I've seen a couple theaters and companies have to shut down, which is really sad.
Hmm.
Yeah, but some of the good things I think has been like I've been able to connect with people that I probably never would have connected with had this not happened, because it's like people from all over the country. Like we met over social media and we were like, let's try to do something virtual.
Oh, that's awesome.
And I've been able to see streamed productions of companies that I would probably never get to go for a while. Like I watch a lot of the National Theatre Productions, which is
Uh huh.
a company in London, I think, or in England. And so that's been really cool to be able to have access to this art that I maybe would not have had access to before, and be able to try to think creatively on how to make art in this time. It's been hard, but I think it's been really really cool in its own way.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. I was just a few weeks ago on a part of a seminar with the head of the theater department of my university, and he was doing like a performance for the audience who was on the seminar, and it was so strange because the performance was superb and I was enjoying it very much, but then he was asking things from the audience and you had to type in like your response or whatever, and it was so strange to see that because as you were saying, like if I think that the audience is important when experiencing a film, like I think the whole experience of being in the theater, watching it with more people is part of like an important part of film. Like it's so much more important for theater because you need those reactions, you need the feedback, um, to improve your acting as you're doing it, to see like what stuff works and what doesn't, um, and what are people responding to. So I don't know, like the virtual stuff sounds so I don't know, like moving into a different kind of thing that is, I don't know if it to me would feel like theater. It always, like I've seen some plays, some recorded or film plays, and it's always kind of strange to me. Like it doesn't seem right for some reason. Like I enjoy them for sure, but it's strange. Um, have you done plays that have been recorded, or how do you feel about that?
Yeah, I completely agree with what you have said. There's definitely something missing. And for like from a theater perspective, like from a an acting perspective, it feels a lot. Well, I don't know. I was gonna say it feels a lot more like film because you're sort of
Mm,
acting, and then you're like, I don't know how people are gonna react to this, and I don't know if I will
right.
ever see the reaction to it. But for me, I have not been in a recorded play. I've been in live streamed plays, and I'm
Okay.
currently in a play that's going to be recorded, but off of Zoom. So I was in like a new,
Okay.
yeah, I was in a new play festival reading that happened live, but we didn't get to like hear the audience react. So that was really awkward. You just kind
Yeah.
of you just sit there. Like for me, I'm an anxious person, so I was just sitting there the entire time like acting, and I was like, I don't even know if I'm doing a good job because I'm not getting any reactions, and like I can't change what I'm doing because I don't know if it's good or if it's bad. And yeah, it's just so awkward. Like that's the best way to describe it.
Yeah, I would imagine. Um, but I think definitely like whatever saves the companies or the theater companies right now would be great, if they have to record or live stream or whatever. It's a tough time for everybody, um, and like I saw somebody shared to me. I think it was like a video of a bunch of actors that were preparing for a play, and they were rehearsing via Zoom or something like that. And it was kind of funny, but it was interesting to see as well, because I guess something, I suppose you can rehearse your lines and your movement, but you also need the stage, no? Like to see like blocking and staging and like figuring out the movement and the space and all of that. Um, so I suppose during this time it's sort of changing as
Yeah,
well.
it's interesting because the Zoom screen becomes your stage. It's this like new element that I
Mm,
it's different from film, I would say, because you still want to be as big as you would be on the stage, but you're using the this like four framed rectangle to play with. Like, and you can play, like, I know when I've done some stuff on Zoom, I was playing with like how close I was to the camera, or like where I was proportionally in the camera. And it's interesting because it's not something I ever would have thought I needed to do going to acting school because I was like, there's acting for
Yeah,
stage, acting for film, and you do have to be aware of these things in film, but it's different because the cameraman's going to do that work for you and is going to move around you, and you do your
totally.
acting thing. um yeah, so it's been interesting to play with this like new sort of like sixth element of the Zoom stage kind of thing.
Yeah, yeah, it's quite interesting. Um, but I was also thinking like there's this fear that COVID will be the end of theaters, as in like to go watch films, but also as for live performances. And I've seen some stand-up comedians doing like live shows on parking lots and stuff like that, where people like drive over and they perform, um, and also like drive-ins for films and stuff like that. But do you think? How do you think this is gonna affect theater? Like, do you think it's gonna move into like sort of this um, virtual platforms, or do you think it'll come back eventually?
I yeah, I hope it comes back eventually, right? And so I'm going to say I think it will, especially because like theater has been around since like the Greeks and the Romans, and it's survived everything up until then. And I think it will survive the pandemic. I do think it's not going to come back as early as we think it will be, because the vaccine is hopefully coming out this summer, and everyone will hopefully be getting vaccine. But I don't think theater. I think people are going to be hesitant to return to a live audience at least
Mm-hmm.
until the year after next, or at least late next year. Which I it's just a money thing now. Like companies are losing money, so that can be really difficult. But I think we will prevail.
Yeah, I would hope so as well. But it's strange because like a lot of people, for example, for film, are getting used to the fact that a lot of production companies and distributors are changing everything to streaming services, right? So you don't have to go to the theater to watch the newest movie because it'll be at your closest screen. Um, so I don't know if the same would apply for theater. Like if we're, as you were saying, like it's so nice that you can watch these plays from like the National Theater or like the Globe or whatever. That otherwise you wouldn't be able to watch because you wouldn't be able to go or to afford it or whatever. But now you can watch them from your bedroom. So I don't know. Like I think it would definitely um, like we're losing so much by not having live audiences. Um, but I don't know if people would come back to it. Like as you were saying, like at least for the next year, people are gonna be so scared to go back to the theater. But if you can get it in your home, and you don't even have to change your pajamas to go watch Shakespeare or whatever, um, would that affect? Do you think? What do you think of that? Like, it scares me a little bit, to be honest.
That's such a good point, and it's scary to think about. I I think that the access to these recorded productions is actually, this might sound crazy, but I think it's actually going to increase the amount of people that want to go to theater, at least for theater. I don't know if this will be the same for film, but I know that when I watch a production online and I really like it, like if I watch a bootleg or something, I want to
Mm.
go see that in person, like so bad. Like I want to see it again. I want to experience it live. Um, and there's something about that live aspect of theater that I hope will bring people back. I think it's really amazing that we have started streaming productions of staged plays, because I think that offers a really cool avenue for accessibility for people who maybe like physically can't go to the theater, or maybe they need like visual aids or hearing aids. And I hope that the theater community can sort of learn from that and go down that path. But I do think that the theater magic, as you might say, will bring the audiences back.
Yeah, and I would like to think the same for film, because it's a completely like you cannot have a screen the size of a theater screen at your house, and the sound as well is so different. And sure, like I would like to have like I agree with you. Like I would like to believe that having this access to all of these productions at your house is going to make people go to the theaters. For example, there's just a movie that came out, I think a couple days ago, that I was really hyped about, and my brother was like, "Oh, we can just stream it on whatever." And I was like, "No, I'm not watching it until until I can go to the theater and properly watch it, because it's a different experience." Um, Absolutely, but I don't know if everybody feels this way. That's why I'm scared
Right,
about it.
I'm gonna just be like, there's enough of us nerdy little artists that we'll go attend the premieres. We'll go back to the theaters.
Yeah, exactly. Hopefully that's the case. Um, and I also wanted to ask you, what are your favorite plays that you've watched and that you've performed in?
Oh, very good questions. My favorite sort of, I think, traditional play that I have watched is a play called Viet Gone by Ki Nguyen, who wrote a very popular play called She Kills Monsters.
Okay,
I
yeah.
remember watching it and having the most beautiful journey of emotions of like happiness and laughter, and then despair and sadness at the end. And it felt so human, and it was also about such an important topic. It was about Vietnamese people in one of the wars, and I'm blanking on it, but it was a really beautiful story and a really beautiful experience. And then my favorite play, I'll have to say my favorite play that I've read but I haven't seen, is a play called Galatea by M.J. Kaufman, which takes there's like an old play from the 1500s called Galatea, and it takes that story but makes it about gender identity. And it,
Oh, nice.
yeah, it's really cool because it plays with this idea of gender as a disguise. So these two women, and I'm doing like air quotes, are
Yes.
forced to disguise themselves as men and hide in the forest to escape like being sacrificed. But then they like start questioning their like gender identity, and they talk about how it's like what they're doing in the forest as men is like a disguise and a performance, and that idea was really interesting to me. And then one more, my favorite experience was I think a year ago in October, I went to see this like Halloween immersive event where I went to this theater. It was called The Cutting Room Floor at the Aurora Fox in Denver. And I went to this theater, and you would walk around and go to different rooms in the theater. So for one little portion, you'd be on the stage. For one portion, you'd be backstage. And there were all these little vignettes, and you would start to like piece together this story of what happened on this stage. I think it was about like a fire that had happened at the Aurora Fox. And it was so cool to just like walk around and be like literally like a hand away from the performers and have them like actually talk with you and interact with you. That was such a cool experience. Yeah.
Yeah, no, those all sound really cool. Going to the second one that you mentioned, I read recently as well a play that was like taking The Tempest from Shakespeare and adapting it to like, I think it was is one of the French colonies. So it was like one island. I can't remember which one. Um, and all the characters were like either colonists or people that were living already in the island. And it was really interesting to see how like a story that was written so perfectly and famously by Shakespeare could be adapted to tell or to have like a completely new layer of stuff and understanding that will help us to see well, in this case a particular uh, moment in history, but in the case that you were talking about, to shift the perspective on gender identity. And so I was just wondering if you, what do you think about this type of adaptations? Do you think we should do more of those? Because I thought, like, at least in my experience with this one, which is called Aimer Césaire, it's in French. Um, I really really liked it because I didn't feel like I was reading The Tempest per se, even though like I knew the story and I could see some of the similarities, but I was I was completely immersed in this new experience and this new story, and I was connecting so much more with these characters than with the original ones because of their struggle and their actual struggle. So what do you think about this?
Yeah, I love adaptations, especially of Shakespeare and of like Greek myths. I think they're so cool and so important. And exactly like you said, like people will go into the theater and it's like, okay, well, I know the story of Hamlet, I know the story of Romeo and Juliet, but then you see this adaptation of how it applies to our current like society, and you have this whole new understanding of the play. And that's exactly how, at least in terms of Shakespeare, that's exactly what he was doing during his time. Like his plays at his time were having that effect on people as they are when we adapt them. When we just do Shakespeare like in the sort of quote unquote way we think it was done, with like the big medieval dresses and stuff, it's cool to see that, but it's not relevant and it's not how
Right.
Shakespeare intended those plays to be. So I'm all for adaptations. I love them so much.
Yeah, I'd like to read more. Because to be honest, I haven't had that many experiences with them, but this one was like it completely shift my perspective on what a Shakespeare play could be. Because I've seen some adaptations of Shakespeare's plays to films, and and some of them are all right. Um, as you were saying, it's like it's like a period film where like everybody's dressed up and whatnot. But I recently watched an adaptation by this Japanese filmmaker called Akira Kurosawa, who did a bunch of them. He did Lear, Hamlet, um, I think Macbeth as well. But they're put in a Japanese setting, and the one in Hamlet is a complete, like it's something completely different. Like obviously it's not in a castle. It's like a businessman and his son, and then well it's the story of Hamlet, but in a completely different setting with different cultural norms, and he's making like very a specific point on how like corporations were working and sort of destroying Japanese cultural heritage. And I thought it was so interesting, but that's the only one that I've watched that I was like, oh, this is a really good adaptation of a story that is in film that is telling another story or that is conveying a new meaning. Um, so if you have any recommendations of adaptations, please send them my way because I'd love to read more of that stuff.
A lot of what I see is usually like theatrical adaptations, and so usually what that is like uh a director will be like, I'm directing Macbeth, and this is an example of when I saw it, except then they'll be like, but we're doing Macbeth with all men, all black men, and making them wear like leather BDSM clothes to make a comment on masculinity. So
Nice.
yeah, it's kind of more like that instead of written
Okay, okay.
ones. But I'm gonna look around for some written ones, and I will definitely send those your way.
Yeah, no, that would be so interesting to read about. Um, and I was gonna ask you something else. Oh, so I have another question that might be not. I suppose it's more related to the first conversation that we were having on acting and representing or performing an identity. Um, and I was in a film production, um, in February, so right before COVID, and the somebody was having like a lot of problem with one of the leads, and because he was like super stubborn and he was not working well with the rest of the crew and whatnot. And I don't know, I don't remember exactly how it came about, but somebody said this phrase to me that sort of stuck with me, and I want to see what you think about it. Um, but it was something like acting is it's like lying, like you're performing something that is not real. So I guess the question is, how how do you differentiate acting from lying or performing from lying?
Yeah. I think that the circumstances in which you are playing, in which you're acting, can, I guess, be in the sense a lie. Like, if I was in a play and I was a murderer, like, I've never murdered someone, so, like, those circumstances to me are a lie. But I don't think that acting is lying, because I think it's about immersing yourself in the story, while of course keeping your own like mental safety, but immersing yourself in the story so that when you're acting with other people, you're truthfully reacting to what they're saying. And if you think of it as lying, I think that can lead to like really fake and forced performances. And this is something like I'm working towards. I'm working towards being as truthful as I can in my acting. And it's hard. It's definitely hard, because you have to be really vulnerable, and that scares people. And so it's definitely easy to be like, nope, I'm just gonna put on this mask and I'm gonna lie, which can work. But I don't know. I don't think of acting as lying. I definitely think of it as allowing yourself to have truthful reactions to these made up situations and scenarios.
So, would you be a little more in favor, perhaps, of method acting, or what do you think about method acting?
Yeah, I I'm not a fan of method acting in the sense of having to like relive your trauma. I don't think you should have to do
Right.
that. But for example, let's say I have an experience in my head of I was trying to bake some cookies and I burnt them on accident because I got a phone call and I got a phone call from a bank company and they wouldn't let me go. That's gonna make, if I had that actual experience in real life and that experience made me angry, there's your anger. It doesn't have to be like I have to use my anger from when I almost got run over by a car or something, because that's dangerous.
Right.
We talk a lot about in class, acting can be therapeutic, but it's not therapy.
Mm.
Yeah, does that answer your question?
Yeah, no, totally, totally, absolutely. Yeah, I'm also not a fan of method acting. Um, but I was just thinking as well, like, and with film, for example, I've had this struggle going back to acting and lying a little bit. And it's like at least for me, once like I got so into film and sort of deconstructed all the steps that make up a movie, as in how you shoot it, how you prep the actors, all the stops that you do in between one take and another, and then how you edit it and everything. For a while after my first and second year in university, I couldn't watch a movie without feeling like I was being ripped off because I couldn't get immersed in the same way that I used to before because I was like analyzing everything. And I suppose it's not the same in theater. Um, but I don't know, like, does that happen to you to some extent? I suppose when you're watching a play, like, are there things that you notice that sort of take you out of the experience because you can tell that, I don't know, because you know the structures and the sort of the apparatus that makes up the production?
Yeah, that's such a good question. I think with my experience with theater, I am not thinking of anything in particular other than when I perhaps go see like a high school show, like if I go see like my sister's show or my friend's siblings' shows, I'll be like, oh, like their acting is really like
Right.
it's not bad. It's just like it's young, and they do like the sort of same things that I did when I was younger, and I probably still do. Um, and so sometimes I see that, but I think it's interesting because with theater, since it's live, sometimes you are sitting there kind of being like, is something gonna go wrong? Like, is an actor gonna forget a line? And it's kind of exciting when that happens.
Huh.
And yeah, I'm just also very nerdy about theater, so I get very, very immersed in the show. And if the acting is not entertaining me, and if I am starting to get in that mindset, I focus more on the storytelling because I am interested in playwriting, so
Right.
I focus more on like what the dialogue and the structure of the play, and then the tech. Like, I'm not that experienced with the technical side of theater, and so seeing really cool sets and hearing really cool sound designs and seeing light designs are so fascinating to me that I always can usually find something to be entertained by to keep me in the moment in theater. When I do have, I'm not as experienced with film, but I have had experiences when I go to see a film or I like watch a TV show and I'm watching and I'm like, oh yes, like I see that like little trick, or like, that like shot didn't line up, or like, hey, that was like a weird like reverse shot or something, because I took like one film class, so and that was after
Yeah.
like one film class I was like noticing these things, and I was like, poor film students like going to
Yeah.
see these shows,
It
and like
does that
I
to
can't even
you. It's so
imagine.
weird. But as you were saying, like, I'm also a super nerd with film, so as well when like a part of a film is not working for me, I focus on something else, like on the set design or on the lighting or the sound design. Um, so yeah, I like all of that, but it was to the extent that I felt so cheated by movies that I moved a little bit into documentaries because I was like I wanted to pursue a little more like the real stuff, like this stuff is happening right now and it's not prepared and you don't know what you're gonna find when you're in front of the subject or the situation or whatever. um which and that's something that I like about theater as well, that even though you do prepare a lot and it's rehearsed and it's um well it's all prepared for the show. There are things that can happen in the middle of a play that are unforeseen, or the audience can react in a way that you were not expecting, and then you have to shift a little bit your approach. So there's that, or somebody can forget a line, and then you have to improvise for like whatever 10 seconds, 1 minute until you get to somebody else's line. And there's that thrill of having the thing happening and unfolding in front of you at the moment. That is like in film, in a fiction movie, if somebody forgets a line, you cut, and then they read it, and then they perform it, and then you have it. So everything is perfect. But I really like that about documentaries and about theater, that there's this quality of veracity, or of something that is true and real and is happening in front of you. So I really like that. Um, I still love film and I still watch a lot of movies, but it took me a while to come to terms with it.
Yeah, for sure.
So yeah, I suppose we can finish there then. I would just like to ask you to finish this. Um, if you have any advice for people that are considering to start in theater or acting, or if they're struggling with their gender identity, maybe you can share some of your experience with theater and how it helped you with that journey.
Yeah, I think for the first part of that, the advice I would give is to always remember why you're pursuing theater and why you love it, because it can get hard, it can get repetitive, and you can feel like, why are you doing this? But if you remember why you love it, and if you have like sort of a ritual that gets you back into the um, theater magic, then you'll be good. Then just don't give up, and you'll have a really awesome artistic life. As far as gender identity, just remembering that you're not alone and you're not wrong for questioning or feeling anything that you're feeling, and um, this generation is going to make art that is going to help you feel seen and feel representative. So your time is coming.